Another draft physics presentation. Yeah, just another crappy comment video. just just really do hate human beings. There's just no way to have civil interaction, and it's unfortunate and such. But nothing you can do about it except complain. So I'm complaining. I wish you people could do better than this. I mean, these really just aren't counter arguments in any form whatsoever. They're just you reiterating that my God says God exists, and therefore God says God exists, therefore God must exist. No. That's all I can say to that. I know. So anyway, Paul Worth. Do electrons exist? Question mark. Tesla, Heaviside, J.C. Maxwell, and C.P. Steinmetz said no. Yes, Jesus Christ might have said no. I go back in history, and people might say no. And what does that mean? Oh, it probably means that they never used an electron microscope, for example. Might mean a lot of things like that. So your argument is that you think Tesla, Heaviside, J.C. Maxwell, and C.P. Steinmetz, if they would have all the knowledge, the 100 years of knowledge we've gained since their opinions were formed, in those 100 years, they wouldn't have changed their opinion about electrons. That's your proposition. I think it's an idiotic proposition. To deny electrons is pretty much to just say you're a flat earther or something. It's just pretty stupid. There's clearly something, okay, more than just a force, and that constitutes electricity. And I think it's just kind of obvious that the electron is the conduit to that interaction. And so you're just retarded. I mean, you're just being an asshole. I'm supposed to be impressed, is what you're saying to me. You're telling me I have to be impressed. I think I'm supposed to think Tesla was a brilliant scientist, when his contribution again is what? What do you think his contribution is that's so outstanding? A modification to electric motors. And what else? Because all his other experiments failed, you know. They were complete failures. He never was able to move electricity through the atmosphere except burn holes in the ground. You do understand that, don't you? No, you don't understand. I don't know why the comment's not deleting. It's just so irritating. I think it's just these computer issues are just quite obnoxious. Try again. Remove. There you go. Thank you, YouTube. Alright. So the same idiot, asshole, jerk. Do you disagree with... So somebody's going to ask the same question again. Heaviside dullard. Well, of course, what's Dullard's contribution to physics? It doesn't have one. And Tesla, etc. The electrons don't exist. Yes, of course I disagree. I don't think Dullard doesn't think electrons exist, but you say so, fine. You're crazy and stupid. Let's see, maybe you should watch Stephen Carruthers. Does he think electrons don't exist too? I might be able to help you. You need it. Again, I already done videos on Stephen Carruthers. This is the Electric Universe people who basically are just veiling physics in a religion because they think they're somehow going to save humanity with electricity. It's a magnetic universe. Just letting you know, not electric. Anyway, people are just so fucking stupid. Alright, talking baby language doesn't make you sound smarter. This is a Ken Wheeler, on a Ken Wheeler video. And again, he's the one who uses words like simplex. That's kind of childish language. It's such a poor bit of phraseology. Okay, it's not a very good way to say something. Okay, there's smarter ways to say something than to say simplex. You say it's simple, or simplest, or that kind of thing. But whatever. If you think his description of magnetism explains why things are attracted and why they repel and with the extreme force that they possess and all of that stuff, and you think that you understand. There's a little engine inside the magnet. It's making the magnetism. Fine, I think you're an idiot. But you're not making an argument. What is this? It's not an argument. Calls himself Skynet. He's the Terminator villain. Oh, very cool. Alright, anyway, so then this Mickey Farley, probably the cowboy again, who knows. So basically your physics theory boils down to the force, it binds us, it penetrates us, it holds the universe together. So it's like a Star Trek quote or something. Yes, I think anybody who knows physics is going to say pretty much that yes, forces hold us together. That's right. I mean, that's the way it works. You know, whether you want to call it the force or not, I don't really care. But yes, I could argue that it's one universal force. That's a unification theory. Yes. And so he says K. Stoner Simpson. I don't know what that means, but whatever. So I responded, yes, in opposition to your theory that the nothing, empty space, binds us. It binds us, it penetrates us, it holds the universe together in an uncertain place in time. Heisenberg. So you have these insipid dualities in your theory, these idiotic notions, you know, they're just made up notions of, they come with no mechanism. Again, magnetism. No mechanism, no energy required. It just magically moves stuff. No energy required, virtual energy. We don't have to explain how. Bent space. No explanation how you can remove space for free. No energy required. You know, if it was made of ether, well then they'd have to explain how they took a hunk of the jello out. But because they made it out of nothing, oh, removing nothing, yeah, it doesn't take any energy to remove nothing. Nothing, you can remove that for free. And we'll just ignore the fact that gigantic planets and gigantic suns and gigantic things are hurling around each other and moving through the universe by the magic force that doesn't require any energy. Because you're just removing nothing, and it can't possibly take energy to remove nothing. That's your asshole theory, and you're gonna, you know, you're mocking somebody else's, and that's what you're relying on. You're an asshole. But anyway, so he continues. But I thought you said all math would end up agreeing with your theory. I never said it that way. I said my theory isn't disputing math. There's nothing wrong with Maxwell's equations, because Maxwell's equations don't say the bent space does, and it doesn't say the ether does. It doesn't say any of it. It doesn't say the wavitons do. It doesn't say any of that. So most of the math doesn't say the things you think the math is saying. Einstein's formula does not have bent space in it. It has the inverse square law in it. Okay, it doesn't have anything magical in it. It has the same things Maxwell's math has in it. It has real things in it, not imaginary forces and imaginary mechanisms. Alright, in the end, now you're saying Newton's theory was right and Einstein was wrong. So again, you just don't even understand. There's absolutely nothing wrong with what Newton did. Newton's equations are correct, they're just incomplete. So you understand the difference between something being complete and something having every bit of a description. Like I could describe birds and I could say they have wings and feathers. Now that would be true, but it wouldn't be complete because they have beaks and they have eyes and they have talons and they have lots of other things. So Newton missed a couple of tiny details, like the speed of the force and the fact that the force is inductive. That is, it has to happen over a period of time. It isn't instantaneous action. And Newton couldn't know that. But that's all that's missing from Newton. Oh, shit. So I responded. all the current math doesn't even agree with itself. So this is sort of a reference to the fact that quantum mechanics doesn't at all fit with bent space. Einstein didn't undo Newton, he added to it. A simple statement. And if you look at what Einstein added to the math, there is no bent anything factor, just the addition of the force's speed and some Maxwellian induction. So I think that's not a disagreeable statement for many physicists. But anyway, moving on. So this is some new statement. Okay. In opposition, so let's see who, this is the, yes, okay, it's the person who, he responds to somebody else's comments later. Alright, so in opposition to your theory that nothing bends us, okay, so he's quoting me, and then he quotes my other statement without answering the first quote. But anyway, law of non-contradiction, motherfucker, do you grasp it? So somehow he says there's a contradiction in these two statements. Me pointing out how the nothing is a silly concept, bending us is silly. Okay, yes, it does penetrate us. So my merely rewording his own silly quote somehow contradicts the statement Einstein didn't undo Newton. How do those two contradict each other at all? Again, I'm going to argue, you keep thinking you're defending Einstein when you defend Einstein's math, that you're defending a theory of bent space and time. But Einstein's math doesn't really bend space and time. It just applies the inverse square law. There's nothing magic in it. There's no contradiction with Newton. It's just that Newton, again, didn't know that there was a speed to light, and he didn't know that gravity wasn't instantaneous. So, and the concept of the center of gravity of the sun, that is the mass of the sun, actually moving, that might have been within Newton's grasp, but I just don't know. But it is sort of a difficult concept to imagine that there's density in the sun, and that density can move without the position of the sun changing. Okay, the law of non-contradiction, motherfucker. Do you grasp it? So again, I just completely... There's no contradiction in what I'm saying. There's no contradictions in anything that I just said there. As stated, I think much of the math is an accurate arrangement of relationships between things. The formulas they use for the two-slit experiment for their stupid wave nonsense, as I've pointed out, all the variables we agree on. It's why the variable exists is where the disagreement is. What causes the sine theta angle is where the disagreement is. Dumbass. Okay, it amazed me how the contradictory Looney Tunes of Mendham, and what does that have to do with this channel? Oh, that's right, absolutely nothing. You can switch your line of attack at any point for the sake of scoring points and self-gratification. Amazing. So you can be snarky and shitty. I can turn your snark on you and win, you know, by basically just buffooning you with your own buffoon balloon. And you whine. Oh, you're cleverer than I am. Yeah. Turns out that way. And he says, draft. Hey man, don't get me wrong. No, clearly. I think your theory is pretty cool. Well, that doesn't impress me either. People who say things like pretty cool. It's far out. Okay, so this is being funny again. Oh, it's more humor. Humor is just so interesting. For children. Dig that. But you're going on and on about rational your ideas are and how insane physicists are. I'm just pointing out how they've built an insanely complex pile of crap merely because they won't go back a little bit and say, let's start over. Let's secure the foundation so the whole thing isn't wobbling and a piece of shit. And they just won't do that. They won't fix any of the errors. They just keep incorporating the errors into their theory, and that's how they end up making dark matter and all this other bullshit. And yeah, sorry if I called out the bullshit. I don't know what you did. At the end of the day, you still have your special theory. Your theory specials. It's just such a waste of time. And it's all your own. And you made it by yourself. And you should feel good about that. Cheers. This is just so not the subject. So yes, I will block you after I read the rest of your rubbish. I'll first get rid of this useless thread altogether, because it was a waste of my time. See, commenting is just a waste of time. You can ask simple questions, they won't answer them, and they'll just keep playing this poetry is fun game. So this asshole starts off, if relativity is false, can you explain this? And it's a link to the airplane experiment where the clocks went in different directions, blah blah blah. Merely demonstrating that velocity can break clocks. It doesn't prove relativity. So again, if relativity is false, can you explain this? So he's saying this is integral to proving relativity the truth, and that this experiment somehow proves relativity. It doesn't prove a relationship between velocity and clocks breaking. No, it proves relativity, which it doesn't do. So I type, so you contend that only bending space and time can explain why radioactive decay changes with velocity. There can be no other explanation for the relationship. Two simple questions. Alright, everything curves space-time because everything other than empty space has a non-zero stress energy momentum tensor. Says you. Okay, even when it has no rest mass. Says you. I mean, talking about the rest mass of photons when you can't rest one, again, is just a waste of time in my opinion, but whatever. It's just your declarations. What does it have to do with proving or answering the two questions I asked you? You contend that relativity is proven by the fact that clocks break with velocity. But it doesn't prove relativity. It doesn't prove that space is bent or that time is bent. It just proves that physical metabolism changes with velocity. Alright. So then Mickey chimed in, DraftScience, explain these real-world observations you describe using Newton's model. Again, I don't have to, Newton's model, again, you won't find a physicist who says Newton's model is no good at figuring out almost anything in terms of the general relationships when it comes to gravitation. And even Einstein's model doesn't work in explaining galaxies, for example, what they say is happening, what their observations indicate. And they create dark matter for the purpose of fixing Einstein's math. So again, your argument that I'm a Newtonian physicist is just idiotic. I accept the inverse square law, and I've already pointed out how I think Newton got gravity wrong by putting the two masses in the equation, because gravity is always one thing causes the effect to the other thing, and combining them just gives you a net force, but it doesn't really explain the individual forces that actually are creating gravity. Alright. My questions were simple. How come you didn't answer them? I have argued in these videos that gravity can be explained by a simple physical force, and there's no need to curve through some magic mechanism of free energy, empty space. No reason to create an unenergy sourced mechanism that somehow moves planets around. You can do it with forces that you know do exist, like magnetism and like light. And you can understand that all those things moving the speed of light aren't moving the speed of light for no reason. Why is bent space moving the same speed as a photon? Doesn't it make a little bit of sense to say, maybe it's made of photons? Just a little bit of sense? And it's going the same speed as a magneton, for example. You know, the virtual photons that cause magnetic effects are moving the same speed. Wouldn't there be a reason to say, well, maybe they're the same thing too? Yeah, there would be a rational reason to do that. Alright, the curved space, magic mechanism, free energy, empty space. The fact that a high velocity can break the metabolism of any clock is plainly unremarkable. So again, as a fact, it doesn't prove anything about these big questions about whether the mechanism is ether, or whether the mechanism is bent space, or whether the mechanism is an external photonic pressure. It doesn't prove any of those. So again, no answer. So you contend that only bending space and time can explain why radioactive decay changes velocity. You're setting up a false dichotomy for others to defend as usual. The dichotomy was set up by the person posting the fucking comment, retard. So this is a guy who yeah, this Russ Rass guy didn't answer. And this Robert Price is the guy who decides to answer. And so it's a pretty simple, question. And now he's, again, just evading the question by saying somehow I'm strong-manning a person who asked a direct question, doesn't this time dilation experiment prove relativity? He basically asked me to explain how it doesn't prove it. And I explained how it doesn't prove it. And he calls that, you're setting up a false dichotomy. How did I set it up? He says only one thing can explain why the clocks move slower. I say, no, lots of things can explain it. Any theory almost could have an explanation for why time dilates. Relativity isn't the only theory in the world that could explain why there's a relationship between velocity and clocks breaking. Okay, anyway. Even Newton could have figured it out in the sense he would have told you that if you move a sundial really fast, it's not going to tell very good time. And if you move a hourglass, or you move a pendulum clock, or you move lots of things really fast, they're not going to tell very good time. Alright, you're setting up a false, okay, no, it is not the only explanation. Right, that's the simple answer, so just give the simple answer. No, it's not the only explanation, and therefore it's not a proof of relativity. But whatever explanation there is, it would replicate the observed changes in the function and length. Well, there is no observed length changes, so again, you can say you have evidence of that, but you really don't. Those are theoretical statements, not actually observed statements. So, keep arguing that you've proven something you haven't proven. I mean, here we are on the 100th anniversary of the Eddington experiment, right? Just to 1918 or 19. Maybe it was so maybe next year. Right on the cusp of it, anyway. You had the greatest eclipse you could possibly have in terms of perfect conditions. So Eddington had terrible conditions, rain. He had to haul a telescope over horrible terrain, of limited capacity telescope, using old photographic plates, and most of them were destroyed or degraded by the weather. Horrible conditions. You had ideal conditions in the ideal country with giant telescopes you didn't even have to move, perfect conditions, and nobody repeated the experiment. And that doesn't say something to you. That doesn't send you some little message that, gee, one of these things that proved relativity, the first proof of relativity, is they can't even duplicate the first proof experiment. With all that technology, all those telescopes looking at it, and we don't have any better evidence than Eddington's evidence. The old crappy plates. No new modern evidence. And that doesn't say anything to you like, yeah, that doesn't sound like the scientific method. I thought you were supposed to repeat experiments. How come none of these important experiments are ever repeated? Yeah. You're setting up false dichotomies for that to eventually. Okay. Let's see, but whatever explanation there is, it would replicate the observed changes in function and length. Well, it's sort of important how it explains the changes. Again, my theory is perfectly consistent with creating an inverse square law. The mechanism is obvious. It perfectly explains why it exists. Einstein's bent space doesn't really do that. It doesn't give you any coherent mechanism. How does the sun in 3 dimensions create the inverse square law? How does it pull space from all directions? Because it's not really bending space, right? That's just a silly mischaracterization of the truth, right? The truth has to be it's contracting space, it's absorbing space, it's pulling space. Doesn't that have to be the truth? So yours is the one that has the huge voids in it where it's not at all coherent to the facts, the observed facts. Keep in mind, these things replicate actual effects in an incredible degree. Says you. I mean, all this fake jargon about how you have this great evidence. And again, every time I point out, you can't even duplicate with all the modern king men technology, you can't even duplicate Eddington's simple experiment. And you're going to tell me how it's all proven. We did it. We have all this incredible evidence. No, it's crap of precision, whereas your theory doesn't make any kind of qualitative prediction. Well, it makes sure it does. It makes lots of predictions, okay? But yes, they're all elusive in the sense that how can you make you can't do experiments at the speed of light. But I predict if you do the experiments at the speed of light, photons don't just magically jump to the future. Your theory doesn't even make any kind of predictions. So again, that's just a lie. Okay, I predict there is no dark matter. I predict that it may be found that galaxies are spilling matter more than pulling matter in. There's lots of predictions in my theory, so fuck you. But certainly photons aren't bent by gravity is one of them. The fact that high velocity can break the metabolism of any clock is plainly unremarkable. I don't know if you got to the second question or not, but it doesn't matter. I agree, because your realization about time dilation. Right, so you agree with the point I was making to the person who made the first initial comment, okay, that it's totally inappropriate to say time dilation proves relativity, because it doesn't. Things moving sideways can't dance as fast is the most basic trivial part of SR. So you say it's a trivial part of SR when that's not what SR says, okay? SR doesn't say it's an issue of metabolism. SR says that it's an issue of things jumping into the future. They don't shoot straight anymore, which expands on that by stating that there's a symmetry in the laws of physics. Again, totally irrelevant. I mean, the fact that there's rules about symmetry, and for certain things to function there must be symmetry, isn't a newsflash. You didn't figure out anything new. It's not about me figuring out anything new. The argument is that time dilation is caused by an effect on metabolism. Nowhere in special relativity is there any discussion about what happens to the atoms inside of things. So you can say there's nothing new, but my argument is it's fundamentally different than the argument made by special relativity, which states the atmosphere around the thing is fucking up perception. It isn't saying perception is fucked by the thing experiencing the velocity. So you can keep pretending, okay, that your theory is saying what my theory says, but it isn't, clearly. And if you had just a modicum of intelligence or self-awareness you think you had, you would have realized that and spared wasting your time. So spared what? Wasting my time arguing against a theory I think is fundamentally wrong and fundamentally preposterous. I'm the one who believes light travels the same speed no matter what its circumstance. The photons always travel the same speed, and they always travel in a straight line. Your theory is that they magically somehow warp space and therefore jump across it and get to locations they couldn't reach at the speed of light. but somehow claimed they didn't go faster than the speed of light to get to the location that's further away than they could possibly get to it with the speed of light, that they somehow wormholed through time to get to some location they couldn't have gotten to, and that they do it because they can't fly straight. So fuck you. Jesus. Rude, obnoxious, stupid crap. Really, just a waste of time. Like I said, I thought I'd try responding in comments, but just a waste of time. Ask simple questions, get nonsense as returns. Alright, so this question, why is the speed of light the speed of light? Well, the more important question is, why is the speed of force that's the same as the speed of light, why is that speed the same for something as strange as bent space, the virtual photons that create magnetism, and the virtual photons that create the nuclear force? Why are all those things, even though they seem to be very different things, why do they have the same speed? How does the sun consume space, contract it, at exactly the same speed that photons move? Fuck you, stupid question. Not even a question mark. So this is where Mickey does a Dr. Seuss quote. So this is where we will block him, because that's just a waste of my time. Alright. So Ingrid says, do you know any clash, Gary? Really well written, between the space benders and the gravitonians. Gravitons only come up in quantum gravity kind of nonsense, and they're not gravitons in the sense of photons moving the speed of light creating gravity. So the word is just they've used the word, but when they say graviton they don't mean graviton, so it doesn't mean anything. And I certainly don't know how it relates to bending nothing space, contracting empty space. Yeah, I'd certainly argue it doesn't have anything to do with that. Alright, so just on the general subject of dissidents and whatnot, I mean, it really is irritating. People are so full of shit. So the dissident science guy, David, so he did a video, he does this expanding, he argues for this expanding Earth crap. And it's probably worth somebody doing a video on the subject and trying to compile all the pieces of evidence that indicate this can't possibly be the truth. But it's just, he's doing this in such a shystery, pseudo-science kind of way. It's like, we don't have to make complex arguments. We don't have to pay any attention to arguments already made and documented. I mean, you can go online and you can find, debunks of the expanding Earth theory, and he could answer those questions, but they don't do that. But it's just, this argument is an argument that I heard when I was a kid, about how the bones of dinosaurs weren't big enough to support their weight and all this crap, and there's no real evidence of that. They're built like elephants. They're built in the proper manner, and elephants are incredibly heavy. They run very fast for their size, so you can imagine that an animal that moved much slower would probably need to be, the elephant could be leaner than it is if it didn't run. Okay, but the fact is it can run, it can climb and do things. So, there's nothing unrealistic. I mean, people think dinosaurs were just monstrous, but, a Tyrannosaurus was only twice the size of an elephant. It wasn't that big. It was big, but it wasn't that big. And blue whales still remain bigger than all of them. But there's so many arguments. We know the tides have been around for a long time. I don't know all the geological evidence for tides, but I think there's a ton of it. And obviously the tides would be completely different if the moon was much further away because the Earth was much smaller in terms of its gravitational profile. So you got a problem right there. And so many things are an obvious reflection of tidal history. Like you could argue even a woman's period is, it's a residue from our ancient ancestors that bred based on tides. That reproduced based on tides. It's an ancient function, being controlled by the cycles of the moon. And those cycles would be completely different if the Earth was much smaller. But I mean, you can make a ton of arguments. What happens to the atmosphere? Much smaller Earth. What happens to the atmosphere? There's not enough gravity to hold it. So you don't even have an atmosphere. You can't breathe anything. And we know you need a really dense atmosphere, but we know there's a lot of carbon in it to keep the temperature way up. And the argument is that the only reason why there's not these big giant things anymore is because of a meteor impact and the fact that the Earth was getting colder anyway. And you can't thermally keep those big animals warm enough. And the only big animals that can do it are like whales, because they have 2 feet of blubber. And that's basically insulates them from the cold, so they can have the warm-blooded part in the core, and the rest of them they don't have to heat. Dinosaurs didn't have that, so they couldn't stay big, because they couldn't stay. They couldn't heat enough of themselves. They lose too much heat overnight. But anyway, I mean, it's just such a it's a fringe thing, and he's arguing as if this is a dramatic proof and a cover-up, and the real evidence really defends. No, it really doesn't. The substance of the evidence doesn't defend a small Earth growing. It just doesn't. And to argue that it's some kind of perfectly rational thing to accept, when there are so many arguments that can be made that it can't possibly be true. If the Earth is changing so much in size, why all of these organisms that didn't change one iota in 300 million years? There's lots of organisms that went through radical changes, but there's a ton that they find that are hundreds of million years old, like mosquitoes and cockroaches and whatnot, that are exactly the same, haven't changed at all, not one bit. And you're telling me the Earth radically grew in size and there wasn't any environmental changes that obligated all of those organisms to modify and change, to adapt to the new gravity? Come on. Anyway, there's a ton of evidence, and it just seems like such truther science. It's not, he's not being a dissident, he's being a truther. So anyway, yuck. Just very disappointing. So, till the next time and such and so forth and whatnot. But I just don't. I don't mind answering questions, but obviously none of these questions have been asked in any kind of sincere way, not even minimally polite way. And I really I have no interest in engaging in whatever this is, this Three Stooges routine that you assholes want to play. No, it's not here for that. So, fuck off.